You talk a lot about the gaps in education. Give me some examples of how that plays out.
So this starts long before people are even born. If you look at the family structure of rich families and the family structure of middle class and poor families, rich kids are much, much more likely to be born into families with both parents still in the household. If you are a woman without a high school degree, or even with a high school degree but no college degree in the United States today, you will have roughly 60% of your children outside of wedlock. If you're a woman with a graduate degree, you'll have only 5% of your children outside of wedlock. So right from the get-go, kids of rich, educated parents have both parents in the household, and other kids usually don't. And then the rich parents just start spending money on their kids. You know, a typical public high school in the United States spends maybe $15,000 a year per child to educate the kids. A really poor high school might spend $8,000 or $10,000 a year, so that's a gap of about $5,000. But the top 20 private schools, as measured by Forbes, spend on average $75,000 a year per child to educate their kids. And all that money buys results. It buys training, it buys teacher attention, it buys careful educational programs. And when it comes time to take the SAT, for example, kids whose parents earn more than $200,000 a year have 250-point higher scores on average than middle-class kids, even as middle-class kids have just 125 points higher on average than kids below the poverty line.
So the gap between the very wealthy and the middle class is much higher than the middle class and the poor.
Much higher, twice as big on the SAT. And on other measures, the gap is even bigger. And the gap between the rich and the poor is truly enormous.
You know, culturally, we seem to have bought into it, some cultures more than others. Indian parents, Asian parents, they are into the meritocracy from the get-go. You know, look, if you just work hard, we were immigrant parents here, we want you to get this best opportunity. The way through is to hit the books. Right? I mean, that's, and at some levels, they see role models that have made it to elite Ivy League academies and say, great, that was this person's ticket out. She became a doctor. He became a lawyer. We have transcended our class.
And I think there are two kinds of responses to that, other than saying, of course, it's true for some people. The first sort of response is, it's not good to make social policy based on exceptional cases. Exceptional cases are charismatic for us. They're inspiring for us. But most of us are ordinary, not exceptional. And so if you want to have a fair society and a well-functioning society, it has to be a society in which ordinary people in ordinary circumstances can do well. The second is that there is a generational transformation here, which is that the elite that is now middle-aged probably did win through that system, partly because, as you said at the beginning, the old aristocracy was very unfair to lots of groups, to people of color, to immigrants, to Jews, to Catholics. And the old aristocrats were not particularly skilled or hardworking. So when meritocracy was invented, it was a great way for those groups to use their natural ability and their industry to get ahead. But what's now happened is the people who won that lottery and won that system are now the elite. And they know how to train their kids like nobody's business, and they out-train. And this is true now across ethnic groups, across religions. So the rich train really well and really hard, and their kids get ahead, not because they cheat, but because they're taught.
Someone's watching this interview, they're Googling your name, and they're saying, look at this guy. He's a professor at Yale Law School. He's gone to all these good schools. The meritocracy has worked for him. He worked hard. He went to the best of the best. What's wrong with this?
So it's been great for me. I want to be very clear about that. Whatever advantages I have, I owe to exactly the system that I'm now attacking. So this is not meant to be holding myself out as a role model for anything. This is an argument about, you know, facts and logic. I also do think, though, there are some parts of my own experience that led me to this book. I went to public high school in Austin, Texas, would now be called an urban public high school. I went to high school with kids whose parents were not professionals, my parents were, who were just as smart as I was in 9th grade. And I know that because we'd have a homework assignment and they could do the problem and I couldn't. And now they're not nearly as wealthy or as credentialed as I am. And the question is, what's the difference? And a big part of the difference is that over the course of the rest of my childhood, I got a kind of support and training from my parents who knew how to train me that's much harder for middle and working class kids to get when their parents haven't gone through the system and don't know how to train.
In a world where the rhetoric of equal opportunity echoes through societal structures, the concept of meritocracy, the belief that success is earned through talent and hard work, stands as a seemingly unassailable ideal. Yet, beneath this polished veneer lies a complex reality, one that increasingly suggests the promise of a level playing field is more mirage than genuine foundation. Are we truly a society where individual merit reigns supreme, or are there unseen forces at play, subtly and not so subtly tilting the scales of achievement? This exploration delves into the heart of this critical question, probing whether the widely accepted notion of meritocracy is a genuine pathway to upward mobility for all, or an intricate system that, despite its aspirational claims, inadvertently perpetuates and even exacerbates existing inequalities. Consider the pathways to success in education, the supposed bedrock of a meritocratic society. Are the opportunities truly the same for a child born into affluence with access to elite schooling and a wealth of resources, as they are for a child in a struggling community facing underfunded schools and systemic disadvantages? The disparities in educational investment alone paint a stark picture, raising doubts about the fairness of the initial starting line. As we peel back the layers of the educational landscape, uncomfortable truths emerge, forcing us to question whether the achievements celebrated as purely merit-based are, in fact, intertwined with the privileges of circumstance. The implications of a potentially flawed meritocratic system extend far beyond the classroom, shaping the very fabric of our economies and societies. If the pathways to influential positions and financial prosperity are not truly open to all based on their abilities, what are the consequences for social mobility, economic justice, and the overall health of our communities? Could it be that the very systems we believe reward talent are, in reality, reinforcing existing power structures, creating a cycle where advantage begets further advantage, regardless of inherent merit? This critical analysis will not shy away from examining the uncomfortable truths that lie beneath the surface of the meritocratic ideal. It will explore how seemingly neutral systems can, in practice, create and maintain disparities, particularly for marginalized communities who have historically faced systemic barriers. By questioning the fundamental assumptions of meritocracy, we aim to uncover the hidden mechanisms that shape our opportunities and outcomes, prompting a deeper understanding of the forces at play in our pursuit of success. Prepare to have your perceptions challenged as we dissect the intricacies of meritocracy and its real-world impact. This exploration promises to be a thought-provoking journey, one that will leave you questioning the very foundations of how we define and measure achievement in our society. Stay tuned for a comprehensive breakdown that will illuminate the complexities of this crucial topic and offer a critical perspective on whether the meritocratic dream is truly within reach for everyone, or if it remains an elusive aspiration for far too many.
So you are basically saying that you are a product of these massive sustained advantages that are structural, that you had two academic parents that could help you. You might have gotten breaks along the way from professors who might have given you the benefit of the doubt.
Right, both the benefit of the doubt and also just attention. You know, when I was an undergraduate at Yale College, the amount of attention I got from my professors, just training, when I got something wrong, they would call me up and say, listen, you couldn't do that problem, let me talk you through it. If I'm at the University of Texas, my professor with 20 times as many students can't do that. And education really works. And so the consequence of this is that the people who get the most of it do the best in the system that we have now.
The Ivy Leagues are a very, relatively speaking, small group of schools when we look at the entire crop of people that graduate or enter higher education every year, right? They're going to say, you know, we are selective, we want the brightest, we're not going to lower our standards to try to just diversify by socioeconomic class. We serve the public interest. What is wrong with the version of reality that they're living in versus what's happening outside their walls?
So I think there are two kinds of problems here. The first is just with what happens inside the Ivy League. In the Ivy League and the Ivy Plus colleges today, there are more students whose parents are in the top 1% of the income distribution than the entire bottom half. So these universities educate overwhelmingly very rich kids. The second thing is that even though they function as clubs for the elite, they're taxed as charities, so that alumni donations are tax deductible, their endowments can grow without taxation. And that's an enormous public subsidy. So somebody recently calculated that Princeton's tax exemption amounts to a public subsidy of $100,000 a year per pupil, per student at Princeton. Compare that to Rutgers, the State University of New Jersey, it gets public subsidies of about $12,500 a year. And Essex County Community College up the road gets public subsidies of about $2,500 a year. So the really rich kids at Princeton get a bigger public subsidy, 40 times bigger, than the middle and working class kids at the local community college. And that's not a just system. The second point I think is also really important, which is that the graduates of these universities then go out into the workforce and they transform the labor market. They transform how jobs are done. They transform industries. They transform industries to favor exactly the kind of fancy educations that they have. So that what happens as a result of this in finance, in something simple like taxi cab driving, you get a world in which it used to be there were middle-class jobs, and now there are elite jobs and impoverished jobs. So taxi drivers used to be middle-class people. You could make a living, you could support a family as a cab driver. It was a skilled job, you needed to know the city. Then Uber comes in, and what Uber does is some very super skilled people with extremely fancy educations design technology that strips all the skill from the driver and has them just follow apps, gets them paid much, much less. And now the driver, there's no way they can rise through the Uber hierarchy to become an elite Uber manager. And they can't afford to send their kids to the schools that elite Uber managers go to. And so you get the inequality in education driving a transformation of work that makes work unequal. And then you get the people who do well at work sending their kids to the fancy schools and the system snowballs. And that's not good.
You point out in the book a distinction between an excellent versus a superior education system. Play that out for us.
Yeah, so excellence as a concept has two properties. The first is it's a threshold concept, not a rank concept. So when we say that someone's excellent, if someone else is better at something, that doesn't make the first person not excellent anymore. So when you're excellent, you're good at something. You can do something worthwhile. And the second thing is that excellence is tied to an evaluation of what it is you're good at. It makes sense to say you're an excellent doctor. It doesn't make sense to say you're an excellent torturer or you're an excellent fraudster. So there's a kind of a substantive ethics of excellence. Superiority, on the other hand, is different in both respects. Superiority is a rank concept, so that if you're better than I am, I'm no longer superior. And we can talk about being superior without mentioning whether the thing I'm superior at is worth doing or not. And so our education system, because it's become meritocratic, because it's competitive, has abandoned the idea of excellence, the idea of making people good at things that are worth doing, and embraced the idea of superiority, making people better than others at competitions without looking as to whether those competitions are particularly valuable or not. That's why the Ivy League now, for example, produces such an enormous number of people who go into finance, which is the quintessential superiority game. There's no evidence that modern finance benefits society, but it makes those who do well at it incredibly rich, and you got to be better than the next guy. And you know, a place like Yale or Princeton or Harvard, the top two jobs that people go into out of these universities are finance and consulting.
So how do you restructure our education system?
You would put a lot of pressure on elite schools and universities, not just Ivy League universities, but from kindergarten up, to educate many, many more students and to focus much less intensively on rich kids. So the Ivy League today spends about twice as much per student per year as it did in 2000. There's no reason that these universities couldn't take twice as many students. There's no reason that elite private schools, which have student-teacher ratios that are twice as favorable as public schools, couldn't double their enrollments. And one way to do this is to tell these institutions, again, from kindergarten up through graduate school, that if you don't admit more students and admit more economically diverse students, you lose your tax exemption. The second thing you could do is various interventions in the labor market in order to encourage people to make and hire people for mid-skilled jobs, particularly changing the Social Security tax system so that it no longer favors elite workers over middle-class workers.
You're also saying that this system, the meritocratic system, does not work for the elites.
Yeah.
Explain that.
Yeah, so earlier we talked about the fact that having rich parents is almost a necessary condition for getting ahead in our society, because you need them to invest in your education as only rich parents can do. At the same time, our education system has become so competitive and our workplace has become so competitive that having rich parents isn't close to a sufficient condition. So that even if you have all the privilege in the world, unless you're willing to cheat and can get away with it, you may not get in. If you look at a place like the University of Chicago in the 1990s, there was a year in which it admitted something like 70% of its applicants. Last year, I think the University of Chicago admitted about 6.5% of its applicants. Stanford admits fewer than 5% of its applicants. What this means...
Well, they brag about that.
They brag about that. Yale brags about the fact that our admissions rate is the lowest it's ever been, our yield is the highest it's ever been. And what it means, though, concretely, even for rich kids, is that if you ever made a big mistake in your childhood, you're not getting in. If something went wrong, if you fell in love and ignored all your studies for your sophomore year of high school, you're not getting in. If you took a chance on taking some classes that were too hard for you and did really badly, you're not getting in. And what that means is that the elites are privileged by all this training, but they're also enslaved and tortured and twisted and oppressed by all of the training and competition that they have to get into them and surmount in order to stay ahead. And so this is not a good system for the rich either.
Okay, it's going to be hard for a taxi driver to feel that pity for somebody who's in the back of the cab earning millions of dollars as a partner at a law firm. Why is their life tough?
So I get that. And I think we need to distinguish between two kinds of sympathy. There's a kind of political sympathy, which is a reason for people to make sacrifices for others. And then there's a kind of existential sympathy, which is just the recognition that everybody's life is the only life they have. And you can be owed nothing by anybody and be a proper object of political scorn, and yet deserve existential sympathy. And the reason why this is important is that the system that we have will not get undone unless we can persuade the elites that it's not working for them either. And so the argument that this system is oppressing the rich isn't made by me because I have great sympathy for the rich, but because it's true. And if they can come to believe it's true, then they're going to be much more amenable to a politics and a policy that will unwind the inequality that we have.
There's something in our psyche that it's an incredibly strong narrative that we convince ourselves, especially if we've gone through these meritocratic systems. If you are that surgeon or whatever, if you are that banker that has specialized, invested in it, you say, wait a minute, this is something that I have earned. Someone is trying to take it away from me, either through taxation or you're asking me to, give everybody else a chance that they didn't go through these hoops, they didn't get hazed, they didn't have to put those long hours, right? I suffered.
I think that's exactly right. A couple books have recently been written by political scientists and historians surveying concentrated wealth at the top across societies, across all of history, across all of space. And these are careful scholars, so they wouldn't put this as crassly as I am. But one way to summarize those books is that in all of human experience, if you look at the societies that have concentrated wealth and privilege as powerfully and as narrow an elite as the United States has today, across all of experience, there's only one case in which that's been unwound without losing a war or succumbing to a revolution. So elites cling to their privilege, and they have to be forced out of it. That's why I'm making this argument that this kind of privilege doesn't benefit even the rich.
You're saying if they are not able to be persuaded, it will happen one way or another.
It will happen one way or another, and it will happen in a way that is bad for everybody, or it can be brought about in a way that, in fact, serves the real human interests, even of the rich.
You talk a little bit about what's happening politically right now, too. There's a quote I want to read. Progressives inflame middle-class resentment and trigger elite resistance, while demagogues and charlatans monopolize and exploit meritocracy's discontents. Meritocratic inequality, therefore, induces not only deep discontent, but also widespread pessimism verging on despair. Are we there now?
Well, I think we certainly are at the pessimism and approaching the despair phase. And I think the mechanism that you describe is exactly the one I want to emphasize, which is that, think about where we began. We began with the idea that meritocracy is a virtuous system that gives everybody a fair shot at success. And then we described the ways in which the rich buy education for their children that is really a form of structural exclusion of the middle class and the working class. Now what meritocracy says, if you're middle class and working class, it says the reason you didn't get ahead is that you individually failed to measure up, that it's your problem. You didn't work hard enough. You're not talented enough. When in fact, it's that there was a structural system that excluded you. But if you're told your own struggles are your fault and your inadequacy, then a demagogue who comes in and says, no, 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 the system is against you, is going to be extremely appealing. And what's happening in our politics now is that the anger of people who are excluded structurally, and then the economic injury is coupled with a moral insult, they're told it's their fault, are understandably frustrated and lashing out. And they're lashing out in politics, and they're lashing out in their personal lives. The opioid epidemic is very much related to this. This is a kind of self-medication for people who are deprived of opportunity and then told it's their fault. So a lot of these problems are the result of the extremely dark internal moral and psychological workings of the kind of inequality that we have.
Markowitz's central contention that meritocracy perpetuates inequality by contradicting its promise of equal opportunity strikes at the heart of the issue. The summary effectively highlights how wealthier families, through the sheer power of financial resources, provide their children with a significant and often insurmountable advantage. This advantage manifests in access to superior education, enriching extracurricular activities, and a network of connections that pave the way for future success. Consequently, the playing field is far from level, and the outcomes are often predetermined by socioeconomic background rather than inherent merit. The stark educational disparities outlined in the summary provide compelling evidence for this claim. The staggering difference in per-child spending between elite private schools and typical public schools, $75,000 versus $15,000, illustrates the immense resources concentrated in the hands of the few. This disparity directly translates into unequal opportunities from birth, impacting everything from the quality of instruction to the availability of crucial support services. The resulting differences in standardized test scores, such as the SAT, further underscore how wealth acts as a powerful predictor of academic achievement, effectively undermining the notion that these tests are objective measures of individual merit. The video rightly points out that while meritocratic systems may have initially allowed some previously marginalized groups to advance, the current reality is that the elite have become adept at leveraging the system to maintain their status. They invest heavily in their children's human capital, ensuring they are equipped with the skills, credentials, and connections necessary to navigate and dominate elite institutions and professions. This creates a self-perpetuating cycle where privilege begets privilege, further entrenching existing inequalities. The preferential treatment afforded to students from affluent families within elite institutions like Ivy League colleges exacerbates this problem. The summary notes that these students often receive better support and attention from professors, contributing to their academic success and future prospects. Furthermore, the perception of these institutions as exclusive bastions for the wealthy, despite benefiting from public subsidies, raises serious questions about fairness and access. The consequences of this skewed meritocracy extend beyond the realm of education into the job market. Graduates from prestigious institutions often reshape job markets to favor elite credentials, leading to a decline in middle-class jobs and a widening of the economic gap. This creates a system where the merit valued is often tied to the prestige of one's alma mater rather than the actual skills and abilities possessed. Daniel's observation that meritocracy prioritizes superiority over true excellence in education offers a crucial insight. The focus shifts from cultivating skills and knowledge for their inherent worth or societal benefit to achieving a higher rank in a competitive hierarchy. The emphasis on lucrative but potentially less socially impactful fields like finance within elite institutions exemplifies this skewed prioritization. Interestingly, that he also highlights how this intense and unequal system can negatively impact even the privileged elite. The pressure to constantly compete and succeed within these high-stakes environments can lead to significant stress and undermine the very notion of merit as a path to fulfillment. The distinction between political and existential sympathy in critiquing meritocracy is also noteworthy. While political sympathy may drive some to advocate for change out of a sense of fairness, existential sympathy, the recognition of shared human experiences and the negative impacts of the current system on all individuals, including the elite, may be a more potent catalyst for meaningful reform. For the Black community and the global colored majority, the critique of meritocracy as a sham holds particular significance. These groups have historically faced systemic barriers and disadvantages that have consistently undermined their ability to compete on a supposedly level playing field. Centuries of oppression, discrimination, and the lingering effects of colonialism have created deep-seated inequalities in access to quality education, healthcare, and economic opportunities. Within this context, the notion that success is solely determined by individual merit often serves to mask the ongoing impact of these historical and structural disadvantages. When Black and brown individuals face barriers such as underfunded schools in their communities, racial bias in hiring practices, and limited access to capital and networks, their struggles are often attributed to a lack of individual effort or ability, rather than the systemic inequalities they confront. The educational spending disparities highlighted in the summary are particularly relevant. Predominantly Black and brown communities often suffer from underfunded public schools, lacking the resources necessary to provide their children with the same quality of education as their wealthier, often white counterparts. This creates a cycle of disadvantage that perpetuates racial disparities across generations. Similarly, the reshaping of job markets to favor elite credentials can disproportionately disadvantage individuals from underrepresented backgrounds who may lack access to these prestigious institutions, regardless of their talent or skills. This can lead to limited career opportunities and contribute to the persistent racial wealth gap. The pervasive pessimism and societal discontent resulting from the perceived failure of meritocracy are also deeply felt within Black and brown communities. The constant pressure to overcome systemic barriers while being told that success is solely based on merit can lead to immense frustration and a sense of being unfairly blamed for circumstances circumstances largely beyond their control. The social and psychological toll of this ongoing struggle is significant. Addressing the illusion of meritocracy and its detrimental impact on the Black community and the global colored majority requires a fundamental shift in our understanding of opportunity and achievement. It necessitates acknowledging the deep-seated structural inequalities that continue to shape life chances and actively working to dismantle these barriers. This includes investing in equitable education for all, addressing racial bias in all its forms, promoting inclusive economic policies, and recognizing the limitations of a narrow definition of merit that often favors privilege over genuine talent and contribution. Ultimately, creating a truly just and equitable society demands moving beyond the myth of meritocracy and embracing a commitment to dismantling the systems that perpetuate inequality.